So I'm going to talk about my GIN, in Spanish GIN, not GIN, because it's Jóvenes Investigadores, Young Researchers, project. And the title is CHIPS, so the acronym of Chemistry and Outflows of Post-AGB Stars. For all of you that doesn't know what an AGB star is, I'm going to talk about that. But the acronym is Asymptotic Giant Branch Star, in Spanish, Rama Asintótica de las Gigantes. So, to start, and also thanks to Miguel, because he has introduced some concepts that are going to be useful for me, like the how we use the Doppler effect, and also what is the angular resolution related to the size of a disk or a telescope. But I'm not talking about galaxies. I'm going to talk about another important element of the universe, which is stars. So I think most of us have a very basic idea of what a star is. So a star is a self-gravitating ball of gas and plasma. It's like a thermonuclear reactor that is synthesizing some materials because they're fusing elements into heavier elements. And in particular, I'm going to focus, or my project focuses on one special. Okay, like this. Okay. So I'm going to focus on the late type stars. So these are M-type stars. So we classify stars, of course. The most important parameter that defines how a star is and their properties is the mass. But the way we classify is due to their temperature and luminosity through the spectral class. And I'm going to talk about M-type star, which are one of the coolest stars we have among different stars. So these stars, well, what we have here is the Hertzsprung-Russell diagram, which is the most important diagram for an astrophysicist. So we are representing the surface temperature of a star against its luminosity. And in fact, like we have here a still picture, but this represents like the tracks the stars will follow during their evolution. Most of the stars or they spend most of their life in the main sequence, like our sun. They are burning hydrogen into helium in their cores. But then all this hydrogen will be exhausted in their interior, and then they will have you have a balance between the gravitation and the thermonuclear reactions, and they will contract to increase their temperature so they can continue fuse helium, and then they ascend different branches, what we call the giant branches, because they increase their size like a lot. For example, a red giant star or an asymptotic giant branch star can be as huge as the orbit of Mars or the Earth. So you have an idea of what we have. And then, well, after some thousands of millions of years of evolution, they will become hotter, and they will develop a planetary nebula, and then they will end their lives as white dwarfs. So in terms of the basic picture of a stellar evolution, or the most accepted stellar evolution picture we have, is we start from a molecular cloud, like a cloud of gas, and this will contract because of self-gravitation, and then also some magnetism, also turbulences. They will contract to form a protostar. This protostar, after years of millions of years of evolution, you will have a main sequence star, like the sun, as I have said. And then you will have two different paths. So one big path will be for the low intermediate mass stars, and the other path for the massive stars. And that is defined by the mass, as I said, is the most important parameter. So if your mass is below 8 solar masses, you will follow this path. And if your mass, the mass of the star, is more than 8 solar masses, you will go this path, okay? So what I have studied, also I participate, like for example with Guillermo, which is also a researcher from the IFF. He does the massive star part, or he's more focused on this part. I do more research on this part of the stellar evolution, and particularly in these two stages. Well, also in planetary nebula, but these two stages, the asymptotic giant branch. And it's called asymptotic giant branch because it's like a parallel line, like the giant branch that we saw in the HR diagram. And post-AGB because they have left the AGB branch. And what is important in the evolution, we saw this is a linear picture in the last slide, but this is like a cycle of matter. So we form a star from a pre-stellar cloud, and then the star will evolve. It will follow the path depending on the mass. But then when it's about to die, this star is about to die, they left some matter that they have synthesized and processed during the life, and these leftovers from the star will form again a prestellar cloud. So you are enriching continuously the universe and the medium with synthesized matter from the stars. And this is the most important part of what, from my point of view, of the role of dying star in the evolution of the universe and in the stellar medium. So, as I said, during these late stages, they start to inject matter and also energy, but this is most important for the massive stars. They inject a lot of energy to the medium when they explode as supernova. But we have 2 points that, 2 ideas we have to keep in mind. So the bulbous stars are main agents of the interstellar medium enrichment in terms of gas and dust. And also the synthesis of matter in the stars and in their envelopes increase the chemical complexity of the ISM and the universe. That's why it's so important to study them. And just to put some numbers so you believe what is their significance or their role in how they enrich the medium. So in this table, which is adapted from a famous book by Alexander Thielens, I represent here some objects, and I'm excluding, of course, here the circulation of matter from the halo of the galaxy to the disk of the galaxies, and also exchange of material from other galaxies. But inside our galaxy, if we measure the input in terms of gas mass and dust particles, we have carbon dust and silicate and metal dust. We see that oxygen-rich giants and carbon-rich giants dominate this input to the interstellar medium. So that's why it's so important to study them. And this is not only something that, I mean, feel yourself included in this picture of the evolution of the universe. Probably you have heard this sentence that we are made of dust of stars. But this is true. That there are research about comets from the solar system. They have studied these isotopic ratios, the composition of these comets, and they have found that some elements cannot be formed in other different stars than AGB stars. So what happened, probably a first generation of stars evolved until the AGB. They left over their material to the medium, and then this again form a molecular cloud that form a pre-solar system and then a type of solar system. So these grains are in fact formed in AGB stars are in fact in our solar system. And one thing that I have to highlight, so I don't really, my research obtains, gives information about the stars we are studying, but my research is not focused on the stars itself, but on the circumstellar material that surrounds the star. So you have to form this circumstellar envelope, and the way you form this circumstellar envelope, or the most accepted mechanism to explain the formation of a circumstellar envelope, is this scenario represented here, which is called the Pedro scenario. So it's a pulsation-enhanced driven wind scenario. So we have a giant star, which is, as I said, as large as the orbit of Mars, but roughly its mass is the mass of the the mass of the Sun. So these stars have a very low surface gravity. Okay, so the material in their surface, if somehow you get some mechanism that ejects the material, it's easy for this material to leave the star. Okay, and due to the configuration of the external layers of the star, you have like fusing hydrogen in cells that occur periodically. So the thing here is like an engine. So you are fusing hydrogen, and then the gas expands. As the gas expands, it cools. So you lose temperature, and then the fusion of the hydrogen is not effective anymore. So they contract, and then it gains temperature. So you have a pulsation, then have a mechanism of pulsation in the stellar exterior, and that will help all the material in the atmosphere of the star to be ejected. And The conditions in the atmosphere is very low temperature, very high density, so you favor the formation of molecules. Molecules that, depending on the temperatures and the condensation temperatures of the different materials, will form sheaths of dust grains. So you will form dust grains, you will have molecules, and as these stars have very high luminosity, the radiation pressure acting on the dust grains will push away all these dust grains, and in this way out of the dust grains, they will drag the molecules, forming the stellar wind, the circumstellar envelope. In terms of chemistry, what we see, well, standard chemistry, what we see is two types of chemistry. As I said, the material we have depends on the mass of the star. So depending on the mass of the star, you will have a carbon-rich star or an oxygen-rich star. In general, you expect in the local universe the oxygen is more abundant than the carbon, but in some cases you will invert this ratio. And if in the case, well, in close to the star, you will have a chemical equilibrium. Of course, this is an approach because it's a dynamic environment and you will have other processes, but in principle, you expect it will be dominated by chemical equilibrium. And then you will have, for oxygen-rich star, this kind of a species, and for carbon-rich, this kind of a species. Then, in the outer part of the envelope, this is exposed to ambient light. And that ambient light means the interstellar medium radiation field, and this is very hot stars that are illuminating the envelope, so with very high energetic photons, and they will dissociate the molecules, and you will obtain what we call daughter species, and which are further products. Most of them are further products of the parent species forming here. Here you have like an idea of the physical parameters we're talking about in terms of distance and temperatures. And this is, of course, you don't have to read everyone, but it's to give you an idea of what has been found so far. And this is separated by the different chemical types. So we have carbon-rich envelopes in blue, what molecules have been found in only in oxygen-rich envelopes here. And then this is not updated. I have to apologize for that. I mean, it has, I think 1 year or 2 years of delay. So probably we will have to include more molecules here. And then we have molecules that are shared between both chemistries. And also we have S-type stars, which are stars that have a ratio, carbon-oxygen ratio, which is close to 1. And I have to say that, in fact, nearly half of the molecules discovered in space have been found in a very famous carbon-rich envelope, which is called CW Leo, or IRC 10^16. And in fact, I would say like probably 80 or 90%, I don't know the number, but probably 80 or 90% of molecules have been found by Pepe Cernicharo from the 80s. And one of the interesting questions that emerges from this research is, well, of course, we have a very naive idea of chemistry, and then carbon is more active than oxygen, of course, but it is really the molecular content, or is this an observational bias? Because IRC 10^16 is very easy to observe. It's close to us, it's very bright, and probably we revise the number of hours observed with a telescope that source. It will be like, I mean, comparing skyscraper with a very low building. So we have devoted more time to observe IRC 10^16. So one of the questions that emerges is what if we also observe other sources like oxygen-rich sources, and we investigate their chemistry. And then we have also the evolution towards later stages rather than the AGB. So as you evolve from the AGB, what it will happen, the star cannot be losing mass during all its life. It cannot be sustainable. So at some point, the mass loss will stop, will cease. And then the envelope will detach, all the material will be lost in the interstellar medium, but the star itself, due to limits on their mass, it won't be fusing carbon, oxygen, and other products. So it will form a core that it becomes hotter and hotter and hotter, and then you will get a lot of UV emission, so you can dissociate molecules from the inside. And during all this evolution, you will see chemistry that depart from the standard chemistry. One is related to shock chemistry. Of course, this happens also during the AGB because you have this pulsation. So you have inner envelope pulsation. This is material shocking constantly your gas and your grains. So it can be extracting material from the dust grains. And also in this evolution, what you see here, this is around this envelope on the AGB. And this is the Calabash Nebula, a post-AGB. You will have the interaction between the AGB wind and the post-AGB evolution. We don't really know what happens here. In this case, probably is induced by a stellar companion. So we have a binary system that is causing this bipolarity. But also, there are other researchers that investigate if this has to do with the magnetism or other mechanisms that can induce this bipolarity. And in terms of photo-induced chemistry, we have, as I said, the evolution of the central star. But also, if you have a companion, you can have UV emitting companions or even higher energies. We are in a project now studying about the X-rays, for example, and their role on the chemistry of these stars and these envelopes. So if we want to observe the circumstellar medium, and we are talking about the molecular gas, we can, of course, observe in different wavelengths, and we will observe in the optical, like this is CW Leo, the star I talked about before, and the Calabash Nebula, seen in the optical. As you can see here, I mean, the star, you don't see the star. What you see here is all these arcs and circle is the dust, which is blocking the visible light. So the star is embedded in that circumstellar envelope somewhere inside. And the same happens here. You see here there is a black disk here, which is a thick disk of dust, which is obscuring all the light that will be emitting the star. And in fact, all this light escapes through the poles of the disk and it gets reflected by the nebula. So you see the reflection nebula here, thanks to the orientation of the system. But what I do, in fact, is to study the molecular rotational transitions of molecules. In particular, CO is a proxy of the whole circumstellar mass. So it's most commonly observed to study this kind of object. So this is the same object observed in the visible, and this is a CO emission, probably 115 gigahertz or so, or in the millimeter wavelength. And the same for the Calabash Nebula, seen as with an interferometer. Here you have the outflow seen of the outflow of gas that is lying through this bipolar axis. And to observe that, what we do, and also Miguel talked about a bit about this, what we do is to observe with dishes, so antennas, with a single dish, like for example the 30-meter in Sierra Nevada, or the 40-meter telescope in Jebes, which has Salvador has talked about it and the visit to it, and also with interferometers. And the difference between an antenna and interferometer, is to summarize, is we use interferometers because we want to increase the angular resolution, the spatial resolution, and as angular resolution is related to the size of the dish, the larger the dish, the larger the angular resolution. But of course, this is restricted by engineering. You cannot build an indefinitely large antenna. There is a limit because you want a movable antenna, and then if you have a, I don't know, 80-meter dish, you won't be able to keep that in place. So what you do is a trick. So you mimic a very large antenna by collecting many antennas, and then you produce like a dish, of course, with holes, and then there's a trick with interferometry, so you can recover the real image with a much larger angular resolution. And what we obtain is maps and spectra. What we do with maps is like a tomography. When you go to a hospital and you get this tag, this axial computerized tag, so you get the slices of your body. It's the same here, but of course we use the Doppler effect because what we have is information on the plane of the sky, so the 2 dimensions, x and y, but you don't have information on the line of sight configuration. So you have to assume that your object moves with a given law, and then you can transform that to a given spatial configuration. So you recover from velocity, you get a 3D reconstruction of the object. And also spectra. So in the millimeter wavelength range, what we get is rotational transition, lines of rotational transitions in vibrational ground states and also excited vibrational states of different molecules in the envelopes, in these circumstellar envelopes. And what we do? Well, of course, well, this is our main goal, summarized in one large sentence, but we want to first detect as many molecules as possible in space. That's a driver of our research, of course, but we want to observe how they are spatially distributed, so we can obtain information about their physics and their chemistry. And through the analysis of all this data, what we do is create models, basically with radiative transfer, which is how the light interacts with matter in your object. So you get the output of brightness distribution, and then you derive information on how your object is configured, how the matter is arranged in your object by doing this analysis. So through all this processing, you get information you get predictions of a spectra and maps that you can compare with your observations, and also with chemical models. But most interestingly, I could talk a lot about what is known from these objects, since we know them from a very long time. But there's a lot we don't know. And what remains unknown is how you go from a spherical envelope in an AGB to an asymmetrical post-AGB. And that's a very key question to answer. Here you have some pictures from the Hubble Space Telescope of very nice and asymmetrical bipolar, in some cases, post-AGBs. Or for example, how you obtain this, because you expect that your mass loss is more or less isotropic in your star. But when you observe with high resolution these objects, you observe like spirals, arcs. This is an example of different AGB stars. And also this is IRC 10^16 CW Leo. You see here these arcs when you observe with a very low resolution, very low angular resolution. But as you zoom in the star, you see some anisotropy. So the mass loss is not occurring in an isotropic way. So there is a mechanism that is affecting the way the star loses mass. And from the chemical point of view, when you try with your standard chemical models, for example, this is a chemical model adapted to the case of the Calabash Nebula. Here I'm representing the abundances against evolution time. This object has the dynamical time of the bipolar nebula is about thousands of years. And then you compare your observed values. You have techniques to derive the observed abundances. You compare against your chemical models, and there is very large discrepancies in some molecules, and principally in the case of oxygen-rich stars. Here is methanol, which is being represented. This is an organic molecule, and also organic precursors like the isocyanic acid, HNCO. And this was one of the drivers of the CHIPS project. So as I was investigating this object, one of the things that comes to the, I guess easily, or it was easy to me, that this post-AGB object resembles a lot to the configuration of a protostar. So we are talking about a very different object. So this is a star that is being born, and this is a star that is dying. But in terms of their physics and chemistry, so morphologically, when you compare them, they are very similar. They have this elongated bipolar shape. When you compare maps of the molecular content, they are very similar also, and they're also the molecular content is very similar. Both have methanol, organic precursors, and they share a lot of their molecular content. And in fact, in principle, they don't have so many similarities. So there must be something in the molecular processes inside this object that is it's common. So that's one of the drivers of the project. If one thing that wasn't investigated in post-AGBs is the chemistry of shocks. Even ices, maybe there are some ices, coats of ices in the dust grains that after the shock during the jet of the post-AGB jet or parts of the dust grains are injected into the circumstellar medium. All the molecules that were in the AGB envelope were dissociated, and then after some period, some thousands of years, let's say, you have some molecular reformation, and you get again new molecules, a new content, and maybe the similarities resemble in these processes. But this is something that is worth to be investigated, and not only from the chemical point of view, but also from the morphological configuration. As I said, and probably the most accepted theory now for the production of these bipolar outflows is that you have a multiple system. You have a binary star, even you have systems with 3 or more stars. But then it is proved by observations that at least low mass stars, half of all the stars in the galaxy have a binary companion. And in the case of massive stars, that number is larger than that. So it is important also to investigate how you go from a spherical envelope to a bipolar envelope. And one of our recent results is to confirm that also, because this was some sort of no with in different wavelength range, but we have confirmed in IRC 10-16 that these anisotropies occur in the very act of the formation of dust grains and molecules in the atmosphere of the star. And this has been a result published, is going to be published very soon in Nature. And this is just a bit of a figure from that paper where we analyze the emission. You have here emission from HCN and SIS, 2 different lines. So we compare the intensity ratio between both, and we see that there is a directional dependence from it depends. The ratio you obtain in an isotropic scenario, you will have the same, you will have a ratio that is equal depending on the direction, but this is not the case when you compare the emission in a given direction. For example, let's say from here, and then you rotate, you will see that this ratio changes. But also processing with more, I'm also doing new processing methods. So the only way you have to, as long as you enter into an asymmetric world, you need 3D models to obtain information about your sources. And here you have an object which is a HD 101584. It's also a bipolar outflow. In this case, we are seeing the object not perpendicular to the plane of the sky, but it's like it's pointing towards you, a bit tilted, like 8 degrees or so. And here representing the CO emission. In blue is the emission that is coming towards us. In red, the emission that is moving away from us, and in green it's a disk that is located in the, it's not moving relatively to us in the line of sight. So now what we are doing with 3D models is try to compare the observations, what we obtain in the observations with synthetic models. And this is quite complicated because radiative transfer problem in 3 dimensions is the very difficult thing, and also there are no well-tested tools to produce 3D models of your objects, and we are trying to get to that point. So now from in 10 years from now, in the past we had like 1D or 2D models, and now we are moving towards 3D to a 3D world. In fact, all the papers that are being published are now using 3D techniques. So that's also another thing I'm doing now. And a very recent result just also to show that how valuable is this kind of research. For example, this is based on KJPN8, is a planetary nebula, and some images. Well, this is an imagery image with the tubular shape of this envelope. Here you see the H-alpha emission. There is a disk of material inside the nebula, seen there in H-alpha. But when you observe it in molecular gas, in CO, you see there is a disk. Well, for example, in this object, there was a debate on the origin. So, as I said, you don't really know how you go from a spherical envelope to something more asymmetrical. And then there were different explanations to the progenitor of this object. And according to our observations, through the analysis of isotopic ratios, we will probably confirm that the progenitor of this object was a massive progenitor. So just to show also a bit of what I'm doing with my research. And I think I'm on time, Alex, or maybe 1 minute or so. So thanks for your attention, and on any question is very welcome. Thank you.